In this video, we're going to learn about a retrofit strategy called angle irons. They've been used quite a bit. Ever since the 1989 earthquake, they came into common use, and the primary reason for that is there were no alternatives. Other, hardware manufacturers came out later and made some very good hardware that's been tested, and angle irons, frankly, are not a tested system. When I was on the Berkeley Disaster Commission, I did some research on them and found out that they had been installed literally in the tens of thousands. So, between the two companies that I talked to, probably 50,000. So they're very, very common retrofit strategy. Your house may have already been retrofitted with them. So, this might be an interesting video for you. In the world of seismic retrofitting, we're always talking about pounds of force that are pushing against a house and the pounds of resistance to make sure a house does not fall off its foundation. So let me show you how that works. So right here we have a ground acceleration that goes underneath the house. The ground moves under the house, and you see how the house was originally upright. You can see that with those dotted lines. So it was originally upright, and now the house is trying to move underneath it. And inertia is causing the house to lean, and is also going to want to cause it to slide off the foundation right here. And that, of course, that's what a retrofit is to prevent. Now look, this is the exact same thing as if an earthquake force were pushing against the house. So you see how it is up right here, and then it gets pushed on, and then it's going to lean like that. So now this image and this image are identical, except one is caused by earthquake force moving underneath, one is caused by earthquake force pushing. Now that pushing force is rated in pounds of force. So all hardware is designed to resist a certain number of pounds of force. That has to do with plywood, bolts, any type of hardware at all. So what we do in every single retrofit is we figure out what the pounds of force will be, and then we figure out what type of hardware we'll need to install to resist that same number of pounds of force. So basically it works like this. This force right here, this ground acceleration, we translate that into a pounds of force that are pushing on the house, and then we take that number and then we come up with the hardware we need. So that's pretty much how it works, and throughout all the videos here, including this one, you will see references to pounds of force, and that's what it means. The remarkable thing about this hardware is that it's quite weak. It doesn't look like it would be weak, but it actually is quite weak. When I was on the Standard Plan A committee, we had a structural engineer who wrote codes and very, very well recognized in the seismic retrofit community. And she did the calculations, and she discovered that they were only as strong as 1/5 of a foundation bolt. So when she did these calculations, she discovered that they resist 320 pounds of earthquake force, while a 5/8 bolt resists 1,550. So it's about 1/4, 1/5 of a bolt. Another engineer here in Berkeley, if you call me or ask me, I'll give you his name. He actually thinks there's something so wrong with them they should be removed, because they will damage the house. So there is some controversy, and personally I wouldn't want to install it on my house because I would be worried, and as contractors we won't put it in because we're concerned about the liability. We know better than to do it, and if we do it we feel that we'll be liable. And especially now there is hardware that's been fully tested. It's way stronger than this is, and anyway, that's the method we go. But let's go ahead and look at why it's such a problem. So not only are angle irons weak from an engineering calculation point of view, but they also put wood under a stress condition called cross-grain bending. And let me show you what that is. So here's right here, this is a 2x4, it could be a floor joist, just any piece of lumber. And what's happening here is it's being bent like this. In other words, there's an earthquake force that's coming up this way, and it's causing it to rotate around this bolt. And when that happens, this it'll split right down the middle. And that's why cross-grain bending is such a big problem. Now, right now, you're going to see an old video I made, and it talking about cross-grain bending. It makes things very clear. The video clip is kind of funky, but it'll make the point that I'm trying to make. Another problem with angle irons is that they put wood under a condition known as cross-grain bending. Cross-grain bending is not allowed by the building code for most retrofit designs unless it's absolutely necessary.
Now here I'm going to give an example of what cross-grain bending is and why it should be avoided. Here I have a prop. There's my sample angle iron right here. Here's my floor joist right here. So when the floor joist pushes against the angle iron like this, you can see that the floor joist will be restrained fairly effectively. However, when the earthquake pushes the floor joist this way, you see what happens here? It bends. And when it bends, it can cause the floor joist to split, and it causes very serious damage to the floor.
So those are the two reasons I know of to avoid angle irons. The first one being they're actually quite weak, and actually they're not tested. And that's really one of the big reasons to avoid them. I remember I talked to a structural engineer in Southern California, and when they were devising their retrofit code for their area, they had actually looked at angle irons, and the structural engineer committee said that they weren't a good idea, so they avoided them. The other reason being that they put wood under cross-grain bending, and as you saw, putting wood under cross-grain bending can be damaging, and should, at least in my opinion, should be avoided. Now, if you want to know what this particular structural engineer says, do email me or call me, and I can give you his phone number. I've talked to him already. He said he'd be delighted to tell people about angle irons and why they should be removed if you have them. He's actually got a PhD in structural engineering. And one thing I'd like to point out is structural engineers and civil engineers have different amounts of training. Structural engineers specialize in structural work, and they have an extra 3 years of training, have extra testing, and they're more, they know about structural stuff. And they have an SE at the end of their name. Now, a civil engineer who is also, licensed, they can do this if they want to, will have a CE at the end of his name, and they don't have as much training as a structural engineer will. And so what we primarily see are angle irons put in designs done by civil engineers. Now, we will not, if we get a set of plans, we will not install these. We know better than to do that, and we feel that it would be negligent for us to install them when we know that they're very questionable in terms of their effectiveness. I'm sure it's clear what the intent of these angle iron retrofits are, which is to keep the house from sliding off the foundation. As you can see, it's not particularly effective. If you want to see how it's done properly, please click on the card above, and it'll take you to a video that'll explain everything you need to know.